Mia Bennet is a seasoned entrepreneur with decades of experience. I mentioned she's like a cat. She's had 9 lives across startups, funds, as well as corporates. So, this is what I'm saying, guys: big, small, medium, everything in between. Mia has made her mark by scaling ventures, raising capital, and building high performing teams, all with a focus on cutting edge technology. Her career spans from management consulting to founding a venture studio and leading multiple successful spin outs serving millions globally. As a former pioneer of PwC's emerging technologies practice and head of alliance and special projects, she generated over £26 million in value. Mia is now the head of faculty and senior entrepreneur in residence at Oneday. It is my pleasure to be part of the Oneday team with her. Mia shares her expertise in entrepreneurship and scaling ventures. She also continues to advise founders through her work as a partner at Asai Capital. I hope I've pronounced that right. Mia, I was getting sick of my own voice, but that was such a massive bio I had to read out there. So without further ado, everyone, can you please give Mia a very warm welcome? Woo, woo, woo.
Hi, everyone. Honestly, it's my pleasure to be here. And I have to say, I've missed all of the founders. It's nice to be back talking to you guys.
Nice, nice. It's lovely to have you here. All right, I'm just going to stop sharing the screen. Before I forget, because I feel like I always do as well, we will be doing an audience Q&A at the end. So if you've got any questions for Mia, please pop them in the chat and we'll make sure we cover at least some of those. There'll also be a quiz at the end as well. So make sure you pay attention. All right, Mia, over to you. I would love to kick us off properly by giving us an overview of Turned On Digital, your first, if not one of your first businesses. So give us a
Uh-huh.
recap of what that was exactly.
Um, for many, many years, I'm guessing like a lot of our founders here, I kind of had this drive that I wanted to build my own business, but never quite clicking on something that I really felt it was a really deep problem that I could build something out of it. And at this point, I was working as a management consultant. I love my job. I love my client, like really nice. And then, sorry, I'm really going back in time. And somebody kind of told me, hey, it's so nice that you now have a really nice job. You're super happy and you've given up on this idea of one day I want to have my own business. Within a week, I quit my job. And then because I quit my job within a week without a plan, I kind of thought, the only thing I can now do, find my own clients. So it was kind of a very without a plan type of thing, which I do not recommend people. Um, so Turn Digital kind of was just born in the moment where I kind of thought, hey, we've built a bunch of skills. At the time, I knew really about mobile development, which, guys, this is back in 2009. iPhone was new, iPad had not been launched yet. All of this was super, super cutting edge. So we then started doing a lot of work for big clients. And then as time went by, a lot of startups who had already built their own technology but didn't have the mobile capability, we became like their secret team. And then in parallel, we started building our own business because ultimately that's kind of what I wanted to do, have a product driven business, but I didn't really have the cash to be able to do that. So clients to kind of feed us, interesting projects to feed our soul, hopefully at some point for the product to be the main piece of the company. And then it kind of evolved into this funny agency slash studio where we built a lot of products, making every single mistake that you can imagine in the way. And then as time went by, building better and better products, being able to take to market. And some of these products became eventually their own companies. So under this umbrella of Turned On Digital, we ended up building the agency side, a gaming division type thing, but also a bunch of joint ventures with other investors and other ex-clients. A series of companies, almost like having a holding company. This is kind of how it kind of evolved.
Amazing. And I'm just curious if we rewind back to that moment where you quit your job within a week,
Yeah.
what was really that catalyst? Was it other people saying to you like, "Oh, you gave up on that dream," or did something happen to give you a bit of a wake-up call?
So, you know, um, I guess three interesting things happen at a time. So every year I would take a week out of my calendar around my birthday to learn a new skill. And that particular year, I had taken that week out to learn how to build apps. And a bunch of other friends have said, maybe we'll do this with you. So we had already started building a bunch of stuff and experimenting, but really for no other reason other than it'll be cool to learn new stuff. So I had a bit of confidence that we had a skill that not a lot of people had yet. And because I was in media industry, I could see this would be the travel, the way to go forward. Then the company I was working with was in the process of doing redundancies, and they decided to keep me. But then I felt, do I really want my future to be in the hands of some random person? And then the third thing was this person telling me, hey, it sounds like you're happy. It's good that you're not being silly anymore. So the three of these things kind of got me to this point of, hey, if I don't make a jump now, I'm never going to do it. Like that day was my one day, of like, okay, this is the day I'm going to jump. I'm going to figure it out. Again, I'm not recommending this, but I basically bought like 6 months worth of food. I emptied my library. I filled it with just like pasta and cans because I thought I'm just going to stay in my house, my flat. I'm going to just work. And literally, I literally wallpapered the walls of my sitting room to have the project plan and the roadmaps of different products we were building. And that was it, like this 24/7, me and another like 3-4 people that were working with us, really fully committed to like make mistakes really quickly, learn as much as we can, and then really figure it out, partially out of desperation, I think, because, I hadn't really planned this. It was like, by all means possible, we'll make this happen. And this is kind of how it happened.
That's so inspiring, Mia. I love, love learning that about you. It's so funny how those three things all collided to create that catalyst. It's around your birthday as well, which I know is always a moment of self-reflection.
That's right.
Just sticking with this, I know we've got so, so much more to go into, but I'm just fascinating in this early stage for a second. I've also been reflecting a lot on how not having a plan. Now, this is not advice that we're allowed to give because obviously it's quite reckless advice,
That's
but
right.
been, I have been thinking a lot about actually, depending on the type of person you are, maybe it's a good thing to have that level of healthy desperation and you're forced to make it work. I know that there's a lot, I'd
Yeah.
love to get the audience involved as well. Like, how many of you have got a day job? How many of you are balancing the one day program? So, I guess I'd love your hot takes on that, Mia, in terms of like quitting your day job and going in, or doing it sensibly and doing it alongside your day job.
I think ultimately comes down to risk, you know, if you have absolute belief in your ability and your edge. So it's not just about self-confidence. There is self-confidence, but there is also like, what is the edge that you have in that moment? Then I think it's time for us to take that leap of faith, so to speak. I think, yeah, like if you're having a hunch, you're having your job and you're parallel tasking it, absolutely we should do that. And then you kind of almost have that validation period overlap with having a stable job. And in a weird way, even though mine was unplanned, a lot of that parallel work has already happened. So I already had quite a nice network in this industry. I already was really at the cutting edge of a lot of these technologies. I was already like traveling around the world giving advice on specific things. We already had built a team in a kind of quite accidental, organic way. So a lot of those things have happened to the point that I felt, yeah, I don't quite know what I'm doing, but I believe enough in myself, the team, and the skills that we have that we will figure it out. And if we can figure it out within 6 months, we're going to stay alive. So that was, that kind of a moment. So without a plan, but you really need to know what is it that you're relying on. In my case, and then, I had some nice opportunities where I was very comfortable also downsizing massively. And because I always knew at some point I want to become an entrepreneur. I've been very careful with like investing my money since I got my like very first graduate job, because I knew I needed like a backup thing, so I had been kind of thinking about it for a long time. There was without a plan, but with preparation.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't advise just like on a whim. You really need to have clarity on what are the things that you have that will help you kind of bridge that 6 months to a year. By the way, guys, I say 6 months. Originally, I thought 6 months. I was like, 6 months, we'll figure it out. It almost took me like 3-4 years to figure it out. So
Wow.
not 6 months, a long, long time.
6 months to just get through the shelves of pasta and like eat your body weight in carbs,
That's
basically.
right.
I love that. I think one thing I just want to underscore before we move on here is prep, like you may not have a plan, but you have that preparation. And I
Yeah,
think especially when it comes to finances, make sure you've got savings, make sure you've got something there. I would tentatively advocate for, controversially, like taking that leap of faith. I feel like a little bit of that
yeah,
hunger, that desperation, you sort of need that
yeah.
fire in your belly. But okay, so let's move on. So this eventually formed Turned On Digital, which was kind of an agency model doing client work, developing apps, if I'm not mistaken, as
Correct.
well as actually producing your own products, producing apps. So I hope that's all clear to everyone on the chat with us today, the live audience members, in terms of that structure, because it is quite unique. There's quite a lot there. As we go into that, Mia, can you speak to the depth over width, like the benefits, the pros and cons of having this kind of portfolio sort of business?
Hmm. Interesting. The really nice thing about having WIP is that you're always working on really new, interesting projects. Every project has its own, like even if they're copy paste of each other, they will have unique challenges. There is always, especially for those of us who are driven by learning, you're always like on your toes. There's always something you need to figure out. This is super fun. Especially for the type of team that I had on myself, like we love this continuous drive to learn more and improve. This is really great. Now, depth becomes really important as you are almost growing up and you need to become a little more sophisticated to be able to compete in the market. So in our particular case, we haven't touched on it yet, but we ended up building so many products. I think over the course of 5 years, we probably built about 40 products. A lot of them pretty terrible, but almost like any of those, each of those terrible things enabled us to learn something new. And then ultimately, out of these 40, we kind of narrowed down to a few. And for these ones, we really needed to develop depth of knowledge to be able to actually build something amazing, not just to get customers, but to keep them and to be able to turn it into a real business. So not just a fun app, but a business that can generate revenue in a predictable way, almost like in an unsexy way. So you kind of want to make sure it's commercial. And for that, we really need to focus. And I think by the time, towards the end of the time with the company, we still had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 companies, which still is a lot, but of course we had to really narrow it down. Um, Honestly, guys, like one of the biggest things I have learned is it's really, really important to focus. Um, I know I'm being a bit of a hypocrite here, but honestly, if I summarize all of my learnings over the last like almost 30 years, 25 years, it really will get you far if you focus earlier.
So the natural question following on from that is, how do you decide what to focus on?
Ooh. So in our case, it wasn't super hard, I guess, because we are driven by what the market is asking for. Actually, this is a skill that I developed really early on, that we will have projects, we'll take them to market. In the early days, we would think, I have a cool idea. I will build something super fun. People will come. Guys, this is such a classic founder mistake. And of course, people did not come. People didn't care. Like, no customer cares about product. Customers care about their own problem, do you know? So we ended up building a lot of stuff, but we were really good at immediately looking at the data and thinking, okay, what is happening? Am I getting downloads? And we had some funny successes early on where we could not tell why it was being successful. Like we had a product that was just really quite rubbish. And suddenly we had like this massive viral growth in Italy. And some random person we didn't know, got back to us, having gone through our whole app and translated it all. Literally send me this text file to say, hey, we love it so much. Here's like the Italian version. Can you just add this to your app? I'm like, this
Oh my
app is
God.
rubbish. Why are you loving this? Anyway, so there were a lot of these really interesting things, but I became really good at also killing projects. So start a project, but not be emotionally involved. Like there were many projects that I just let it go on for too long, but there were
Mm.
also projects that we managed to really quickly say, hey, it's not hitting what we want. We have missed a point. Let's close it. What did we learn? How are we going to do differently for the next project? And down the line, I ended up in City Ventures, a fund where we did a lot of investments into startups. And actually, this was like one of my key skills there, to be able to really quickly manage a portfolio, really quickly decide where capital needs to be allocated, and do the right bets rather than just investing on everything. So it's kind of like this iterative process of, what is the market telling us? Does this have a future? Yes, no. Okay. If no, let's not be emotional about it. Take the lessons, close it, next one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of, it's at the beginning, it feels a little bit harsh, but actually it's the only right thing to do until we figure out what is the right thing to focus on. So
Yeah.
kill the things that are sucking energy and attention away,
I
but
totally.
in your heart that is not the right thing to do.
Do you know what? You ending on that note, in your heart, you know what not to do. I was literally just about to say, there's no shortcut to experience, and part of the experience, growing through what you go through, means that you actually amass a vast array of data points in your entrepreneurial gut instinct.
Exactly.
So this is you just ending
Yeah.
on in your heart. Actually, the way what I exactly was in my mind was you just know, because the devil advocate to that is, oh, but like, have we tested it enough? Do we have enough data or whatever? Like, there's so many different ways to slice the
Yeah.
pie that in your heart or in your entrepreneurial gut instinct, you know to kill it off faster. I just want to
Yeah.
add, because you got me so excited on this point. I'm a bit of a linguist, and for anyone else who's interested in language and words, the power of words, I love so much. I can't even describe why or how I love this so much. But I read somewhere the word decide, I think it would have been in like Atomic Habits, one of those like self-development books. What we forget, you said that a lot of times as well there, Mia, deciding what to kill off,
Yeah.
decide. Being decisive as an entrepreneur is such an underrated skill. The word decide, it actually means like killing off something. So
Yeah.
if you think suicide, homicide, it's the same side in decide.
That's right.
And this is really, since I read that, I never read, it's really stuck with me. Like, not to go dark saying homicide, suicide, but it's kill, decide is you're killing it off and you make that
Yeah.
decision off and you move on. All
You
right.
know, just following on this note, I think a lot of founders, um, we talk a lot about like what are the skills that really make a founder. And, we might touch on this, over the last like 25 years, I've been in this space. And you can imagine like hundreds of founders I've worked with or I've kind of had contacts with. Being decisive is one of those really key skills that people don't really talk about it that much.
Yeah.
And if I may do a plug for Oneday, we actually do have a module on it, really far off. So it's in middle of tier 3. But honestly, you need it from day one to be decisive, be okay with it.
Yeah.
Decide, worst case scenario, we've made a mistake, not a big deal. You just go back 2 steps.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
much better to do that.
Exactly. And I think when you run your first business, I don't know how many of you have had a business before or you're just starting on your first one, but I read somewhere that the average human, I can't even remember the number actually, but like the average adult makes something like, I don't know, like 300 micro decisions a day, for example, which means that an entrepreneur makes 5,000 decisions a day. And the
Yeah.
questions that come your way, it's just decision fatigue is real. So exercising that muscle is really key. All right, Mia, moving on. I want to talk about one of your fantastic growth strategies with
Okay.
your back during this time in this chapter with Turned On Digital. Can you tell us about that defining moment with an artist collaboration that worked for you?
Yes. Um, so maybe I'll give a tiny bit of context. So at this point, we're an agency. I'm continuously going after clients. So business development. And at heart, I'm very much a product person. I love to like build stuff. I'm not necessarily a business dev kind of person. Anyway, so I'm continuously filling proposal after proposal. And of course, we're working with like relatively big brands by this point. So it's proposal, proposal, proposal. I remember like 1 month, I had done like so many proposals, none of them had come back. And then I was like, that's it, I'm not wasting any more time writing these long things. And then I was sitting there, it was like early in the morning. and thinking like, what am I going to do? Like, this is not the way to build a business. I got to like find a faster way. And then I kind of realized like one of the reasons is that we are a really tiny team. I really didn't have a clue on how to build that sales side of the business. I think I had the expertise, but not the sales. And you know, if anybody thinks business is all about like hard work and product, they are wrong. Sales is so important. Sales and marketing really is make or break. Uh, anyway, so as it happened, I was always a fan of these dual artists called Bendrick. And I had one of their books on my coffee table. And I was sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I could have like creative people like this who help me with this problem. And then I was always saying this to myself. I was like, hold on a second. They are alive. I can just drop them alive. Like I don't need to like wish it. I can just take a step. And it was like 3, 4 in the morning. I looked them up. I couldn't find their details, but I found their agent. So I sent an email to the agent to say, hey, we're a small company. We're doing apps. If you don't know what an app is, this is what it is. And we would love to do a collaboration with them. What do you think? Literally next morning, I got up at like 10 or whenever it was. The agent had already spoken to them. They had already come back to me and they said, yeah, that sounds nice. Why don't you come to our office? So I turned up to their office like a couple of days. They loved the idea. And we came up with like a really simple thing to test. We started working on this thing. And this was really interesting because we met their agent, who was one of the top agents in publishing industry in the UK, and their manager, the business manager. The business manager turned out a few years forward as a co-founder for me for another startup. So all of these relationships are actually really nice how they play out. But anyway,
Uh,
coming back to this story, um, we started building something, and then after maybe a couple of months, we realized, or they realized, they actually felt the idea was just too simple, not really super exciting. And we're like, guys, feel free, change whatever, we will build it. Because I had absolute belief in the team, and I was like, we'll figure out. They came up with an idea that technically was not possible at the time with iPhone, like with the technology at the time. We ended up doing some very naughty hacking to make it work. And then we launched it during South by Southwest. If you guys don't know, it's a massive conference in the US. And the app just massively went viral. Now, here's the tricky thing, that even though we went viral, we actually had a very small window because actually Apple found out that we had done some hacking. And then they were like, maybe we should take this off the App Store. But by this point, we had already been picked by the Museum of Modern Art in New York to be exhibited. We already had won tons of awards. Everybody had written about us. A huge amount of PR
wow.
and a lot of interest. And what happened was everything kind of switched. Instead of me looking for clients and agencies, much bigger, like Ogilvy, these type of agencies, they started coming to me because in every magazine they had read about this like really crazy. That's right, naughty hacking is very good. Um, you know, so even though this app was relatively short lived, I think we might have been alive maybe for like 5, 6 months, but it was enough to like cover a lot of these big events. And we were really quick at really riding that PR wave.
Hmm.
Because for those of you who have never done PR is really amazing. You get a peak and it will die really quickly. So you've got to find a way to leverage it massively. During that time, I ended up building a lot of partnerships, some of it with my competitors. And the competitors were really big, who were like, or focused on a specific angle. I would tell them, hey, anything you don't want to do, we will take it off your hands. And we literally did not have to do business development after this project. So this
Wow.
was like a really nice way to drum up business, at least for the agency side, where we could then focus on deeper relationships as part of partnerships. And yeah, and like interesting project, which
Yeah.
was kind of quite different, I think, to a lot of, let's say, the standard things people might do.
That's so fun. I love that. Really creative
Yeah.
marketing, PR, buzzy kind of guerrilla tactic. Do you remember and are you allowed to share like how much that collaboration was and then the ROI that it generated?
Ooh, so we didn't do a commercial thing. The agreement that we made with them was, hey, if we ever sell this or if we ever do anything, we'll do 50-50. So we did it really simply, but we actually never commercialized because the app, the app was called Situationist. For those of you who might not know, Situationist is actually a name of a movement that started in France that's kind of really against individualism. And the whole message of this app was, hey, with mobile products, people are going to be really into their phones, they're going to be more into digital, but we really need to bring people into real world. So the app was a kind of a location-based game, encouraging people to get out of that digital world and kind of interacting with each other. So it was kind of quite controversial in some sense. And
That's
because
nice.
of this like anti-capitalism angle, we also felt really weird to commercialize it. But it had
Mm,
so much return in terms of extra business, other partnership, other relationships that we built along the way. Like literally would open doors. I remember like some somebody reached out to me from Unilever, and he was like, "Hey, I saw this app. I'm like super impressed. Can we meet?" And done. Like we were doing something with them. Do you know?
wow.
So it was a interesting one that on paper you would think, "Hey, why am I spending 6 months building this?" But
Yeah.
actually, you have faith, you keep going, you know why you're doing it, and trust that the return will come.
Yeah, yeah, that's so exciting. I love that. So, keeping with the theme of growth strategies, so you mentioned you had this really fun, cool artist collaboration that drove all of this like buzzy PR. You also mentioned earlier about this random growth spike in Italy just because somebody loved the product so
Yeah.
much, did a voluntary translation. Was there anything else during this time, especially given your wide aperture with such a variety of products? Were there any other like unconventional growth strategies that worked for you at this time?
Um, so I guess at the time they might have been unconventional. Right now, if I tell you guys, you will see like this is basically what we teach in Monday. But if I kind of go back after everything that we learned, because I'm a little bit embarrassed to say, basically, I used to do a lot of cold outreach to blogs, to people who were interested, like people I thought might be our target market. Guys, it was kind of okay, but it wasn't great. But I really didn't know what else we can do. And then at some point, we decided to build a community before we actually build even the product. So we did, that's actually a few years after. And it's going to sound like very conventional right now, but at the time we were like being very cutting edge, or I felt we were cutting edge. We basically wanted to build a particular product, but we didn't want to jump into building full on. So we did like, you cannot imagine the most watered down version humanly possible. Like literally, this was supposed to be an app, but we did it on a website to the point that we had no graphics. It's basically a white page, some text, some squares that would represent basically like a wireframe, boxes that would represent images. And then we basically got people to use this to get a lot of feedback. So we built this community up. And then by the time we ended up actually launching, we had already seeded because I think towards the end of our testing, we had about 1,000 people who were playing this particular game. So when we made the switch, actually was a really nice way to get it started. And then I think by this point, we've also had learned quite a lot of stuff around who exactly your customer is and just go where they are. Like instead of thinking, oh, Facebook group, I'm going to like post there. Like, okay, we know there's this particular group. We know in our case, there were students who are potentially in technical universities. And literally we went to recruit them there. So this is kind of another really nice way that we build some initial growth with one of our products at least.
I
Um,
love
in fact,
that.
I'll give you another really random story. Um, you know, uh, Going back to this idea that in your heart when things are working or not working. With this particular product, one day somebody sent me a message on Facebook to say, Mia, I really love the t-shirts that you guys are doing. I'm like, what t-shirts? Like, the t-shirts with the characters are so cool. And then I was like, where are you getting these from? And the guy told me, like, oh, on whatever street, we're buying them. So somebody had started pirating our really terribly designed characters because we had no money for designers, by the way. Like the person who had done the designs for this particular product was like one of our engineers who was learning how to use Illustrator. Anyway, and like this was the moment that I felt this product will make it. You know, when
Mm,
you're seeing this kind of really funny organic growth and people actually, not just word of mouth, actually putting it on t-shirts, you kind of think, okay, it is going to
that's
have its own life. Mm.
that's a great validation point, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
know how product market fit is described on paper, but I'm such an intuitive kind of feely sort of person that I love how product market fit is actually described on an emotional standpoint, and it's what you
Yes.
just kind of feel when you have it or when you don't have it, right?
You
So
know, we did something at some point where we had to like switch over our servers, like just to scale. And I think we ended up losing the data, like the gameplay of maybe like 6 hours. We immediately panicked and we kind of said, okay, we're just gonna like give them extra. We will do some calculation of how much they would have lost. Anyway, so everybody had actually made something out of it. But within the 1 hour that we were trying to figure out how to fix this problem, you cannot imagine the amount of hate mail I got. And
wow.
people were just so upset. They were so
Wow.
upset. And in a way, I kind of thought, yeah, this is not a great feeling. But the only time that your customer will say something is when they're genuinely emotionally involved. Even
Yeah.
when they're saying something negative, that's
Yeah.
actually a really great sign because they can be
Yeah.
bothered. And if you
Yeah.
can fix it, you can keep them. So it's not a big deal as long as you can be fast and you genuinely want to help the customer.
I
But
love
yeah, like this is exactly one of those product market fit kind of moments
yeah.
that you feel, yeah,
That's
they're asking for, they're
amazing.
pulling it.
Yeah, what a great story, Mia. All right, before we start getting towards the end of this chapter, because I've got a few more questions. I know some questions are coming through on the chat as well, so let's move things along. Um, we talked about some of the highs, we talked about the growth strategies and the highlights during this time. You've also hinted at like some lessons learned. Would you like to share kind of the maybe the top 1 to 3 big mistakes
Yeah.
that took you some unforgettable lessons here?
Stephanie, they're going to be so classic. First thing, don't build before you have any kind of validation. Guys, this is, I feel, a rite of passage for all of us. We will all do this. But if you can avoid it, avoid. Um, every idea sounds really beautiful in our head because, of course, you're using your imagination. You're imagining it when it's big and beautiful and you have tons of customers, you know, when it's mainstream. But in the beginning, it's not like that. So validate, that's really the number one. The second, I think staying a little bit more focused when you're saying, hey, I think 2 ideas, even if you have the time for it, it's not just about time, it's about attention and love that goes into each side. And I think sometimes we forget it. We kind of think, well, 5 hours this, 5 hours that will be okay, but not really. And third, oh, guys, nothing can be done without people. Like ultimately, it will be the team, the partners, your suppliers, all of these people that you're working with, your clients, will make the business. It's not really about a product. It's really about figuring out what is it the market wants, people. And then when you're having your team, how are you going to keep them going? For the first maybe year and a bit, I did not pay anyone. Like literally everybody worked for free. And everybody worked all the time. Eventually, when we managed to start getting revenue, we ended up having this little office, which had literally a sitting, like a main room, and then a tiny room. The tiny room was just full of like bed sheets and pillows because people used to stay in the office forever. And not because we had asked them to do that, because they love working on the projects, because they felt it was like part of their growth, you know, like building that kind of culture and really looking after people really can make the company really nice.
I love
Yeah.
lessons. Amazing. So I know that there's so much here, so we're kind of speeding through some of your amazing experience. As we career towards the end of this chapter, I was really fascinated to hear that you actually have quite a different perspective when it comes to exiting, right? So we're going to move on to like exiting this amazingly successful business that you were part of. Most entrepreneurs would be like, oh my God, like I get to cash in my chips and sail
Yeah.
off into the sunset. But of course, that wasn't the case for you, was it?
No, it was not. So when I decided and the opportunity came up, so a combination of the two, to step away from the business. No, we were doing really well. We already had like for a year before this time, we actually had a lot of investors who were showing interest. And I had built companies jointly with other companies, other people, other investors. And some of these companies, this is actually the very first exit that we did, was a platform that we built with a second company. And them and some investors wanted to buy my share and own it fully. And I actually I felt it was the right thing for the company to do, because by this point I was kind of moving away. It was actually really hard for me to travel all the time. There are a bunch of different personal things, but I was so sad about it because I really wanted to just build companies. I wanted to be my team. I wanted to see what else we could do. And, I think a lot of people think entrepreneurship is this really glamorous path where we raise money and it'll be super fun, or we will sell and we'll be super rich. Like neither of those two are really true. If you raise money, you've got to forever think about, the investor and what to do, and you have to have hyper growth to make it work. If you sell, you're going to be super bored and feel a little bit empty, or at least that's how I felt. And I also felt that I'm letting down my whole team by kind of stepping away. Yeah, so my experience was very funny. I just wanted to build a really good business that's sustainable, that people are happy. We will work on projects that we want to work on. So at
Yeah.
some point, we became sustainable. And by this point, we were maybe 25, 30 people where we didn't have to get client work anymore. And we eventually grew to about 50 people. And none of it with raising money, all of it just generated within the company. I mean, there were a lot of rough times at the beginning. I didn't get paid until like the last year. Everybody else was kind of getting paid. So there were a lot of sacrifices during this time. Uh, but nonetheless, it was just really sad stepping back.
Oh, yeah.
I was so sad about it that for years I really didn't talk about the company. Like even when I got my next role, which was building a company within a company, different story. I still like didn't. I felt really weird talking about some of the stuff I had done.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm a little bit over it.
I feel a little bit, I can still tell the sadness, but I feel like it's almost more, I don't know. I don't know if I should say like more of a true entrepreneur, but I didn't start my last business to exit it, and I think
Yeah.
if you start with the end in mind, you're not doing it for the right reasons and you're not motivated in the right way. So I do get it. So as we kind of move on a little bit in your journey here, I know you went on to kind of, start new businesses and new ventures and everything else. I know there's a question that's come in here as well, so that kind of links the two. I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of your alternatives to funding, right? So you just mentioned
Uh-huh.
fundraising, the glamour
Yeah.
around. How can you tell us about the alternatives to VC? Because especially in tech entrepreneurship, it's like venture capital is like the default. What are some of the other ways that founders can go and raise money?
Okay. Uh, so this is a really interesting one because I actually tried at some point also to raise funding, um, unsuccessfully, I might add. But then I ended up in venture funds and doing like a lot of work with founders. And some of the things that my view is, guys, the investors are thinking about how can I increase the return on my money? Because remember, their money is also coming from another investor. So their agenda is, hey, I'm going to give this person 100 grand. I want to get 1 million back within like 5 to 6 years. This is it. This is like the thought process. The founder, on the other hand, is thinking, oh my God, I love this problem. I love this customer. I want to like build awesome things. We're going to have a great team. We're going to have this amazing company. These two agendas, in most cases, are not aligned. So the VC is giving money to say, hey, here's some money for the return. But then once the founder gets that, you have no other choice to demonstrate that 10x growth, which means continuously you then need to kind of run to raise money. Why? Because you got to get the growth. The growth at these numbers cannot just come organically. So you got to run, advertising on different paths, spend money to make money, and getting diluted in the meanwhile. Now, this is not to say you should never raise VC funding, but there are alternatives. So I want to talk to those alternatives. If you're doing deep tech, if you're doing marketplaces, there is almost no other way. So at some point you will have to. But some other alternatives that have worked for me. You know, when I was talking about my joint ventures, we did like these interesting partnerships where we said, hey, I'll bring tech, you bring money. And it's kind of still that investment, I guess, path without the name of the VC with somebody who doesn't expect 10x, they kind of expect building a business. This really worked really nicely for me. We actually did this with an ex-client of ours. So a client who has worked with us, they knew how we work, they really liked our work. We had done a bunch of projects with them. And then we built jointly together, we discovered the problem, we kind of went back and forward, we knew it was validated, and then we invested this way. We did basically a distribution platform. Now, this is one path. So partnership is kind of a really interesting one. I'll give you another example. When I was at PwC, I ran this really interesting team where I looked at a lot of startups to find people who can solve very specific problems using technology. And one of the things that I did for them was to, because we really wanted their expertise, they were doing something really awesome. So I commissioned a lot of work. So effectively, you're doing a pilot program, maybe with not a lot of money, but at least you can test and have a case study. Then you can go to the next client. So effectively, you're getting the clients to fund you, yeah, and without even necessarily having the full product. This is very possible. But even in consumer, you can do this. But in this period, I did a really interesting deal for an AI company. This is, guys, almost 10 years ago. So not this kind of environment, and where they were super interesting, and our company just wanted to have access to their talent, literally just that. And I asked them, hey, how much money do you need? So for 6 months, you're not going to worry about sales and you're not going to be distracted. They gave me a number. I presented to the board, raised the money internally. There you go. For 6 months, do nothing else. I don't play with us. Let's see what we can do. You know, it sounds a bit magical, but if you know the relationships, if you understand the actual problems that people have, you can unlock these type of opportunities. You know, you
Mm,
need to find who is the right person within an organization, what is that deep problem. So not fluffy things. This will not work for fluffy things that really have a commercial value attached to it. Then you can
mhm.
find these. There are also alternative funds. Guys, I actually gave a talk on this. Stephanie, I don't know if you've seen it, on micro VCs, micro funds, different ways that you can raise capital for anybody who wants to do bootstrapping. You need to like dig that out in the library. Have tons of resources there. These are there are a lot of these funds that are run by founders. They're much more friendly. They try to cover basically they invest against the revenue. So it's a very different model. In fact, I have invested in one of them called Calm Capital. I really recommend like looking at their models as well. This is really for SaaS companies. If you're building a SaaS, this is kind of an interesting place for you guys to look.
Okay, amazing. I'm just making a note of that. That resource that you talked about, Mia, is that a masterclass or where can people find that?
Um, I think it will be in the library. It's a talk I gave maybe 2 years ago, so it's actually a little bit old. So they might need to go back in time. And in fact, I gave two talks, one on bootstrapping and one on VC. So whichever you're interested in, you can go and get some nice resources there.
Okay, amazing. We'll have to dig those out. I think that was a question before from Amit, who wanted to understand a bit more about the VC world. So I hope that that gave you a bit more clarity, Amit. Definitely check out those two videos that Mia's talking about that's on the library. Also, I just wanted to clarify for our audience what you were just describing before, Mia, around talent, money, different sorts of partnerships. This was during your role as a strategic like, head of partnerships at
That's
PwC, right?
right.
Yeah. Um, During, I think I've kind of got, maybe I'll squeeze in one last question before I'll come to the audience, then we'll do the quiz at the end. During your time at PwC, so you've gone through this incredible entrepreneurial journey. I feel like you've sort of 10x your entrepreneurial experience by having this agency slash venture studio, right? Like all of this in one, launching like, what was it, 50 products in 4 years or something.
Don't remind me. It was so crazy.
And then you kind of looking at it from sort of a different side of the fence in this role in corporate, looking at these deep tech startups. So one of my final questions here is, I know that part of your role was to identify and analyze these deep tech startups for potential like acquisitions further
Mhm.
down PwC. What were the three markers of success with these early stage startups? Because now, almost a decade later, they've either exited, they've either IPO'd or been acquired. So you clearly have a fantastic skill at recognizing how an early stage business is going to become a huge success. What are those three top markers?
Um, it's actually super interesting because, I went in a year, 1 year, I met with 500 startups
Wow.
super intensely. After those 500, then we did maybe 15 deals, and after those 15, maybe a few strategic partnerships. But during this time, I also analyzed um, who do we want to keep an eye on, whether or not we do something for this eventual, maybe we do something eventually. Um, and when you're meeting 500 people like back to back, you see patterns really quickly. One of the things that always stood out for me, the ones who really, now that especially when I look back, is a really massive thing was like clarity of thought, So not like we're doing this and this and this and this, but no, we're doing this because we're solving this problem. This is the impact. So being able to articulate really crisply, really clearly, not to be scattered, not to have too many random things in, this absolute clarity of mind. So that was one thing. The second thing, almost every single one of those people, many of them were super early, by the way, like really early in their journey. But every single one of them had spent so much time in their domain. So it could be that, for example, I met this guy who was a recent graduate from a university. So like relatively inexperienced. They were building a technology to be able to verify identity. That's what they were doing. This company, so something like very unsexy, not super like exciting. If you think about like a 20-year-old working on this, maybe it was like 22, I don't know. But he was very young. And he was doing this with a couple of other classmates. But they were talking about with such depth of knowledge that they had almost made themselves experts in something like a really weird and niche for like a bunch of 22-year-olds. And I remember having this discussion with him, and I realized before coming to see me, he had read almost everything we had published on PwC on this particular topic and a bunch of other things that were related to this. So he hadn't just like Google stuff. He had really understood like what is it that I know, what is it that our company knows. Like he's done this deep dive. He had like a really meaningful, really directional conversation, and that kind of being that 1% expert or moving that direction. So it's not enough to just say, hey, I want to do like a food brand, or I want to do like a nice company doing whatever. You really need to understand it. Or at least the ones that I saw were successful did that. And then the last one, I would say, and this is a funny one, almost none of them were, like this classic super alpha male, showy. They had this very quiet confidence that you could trust that they will do stuff right and be show. Um, is this was kind of really interesting that they were okay to say, hey, I actually don't know, or I made a mistake, or and they had this curiosity. They would continuously ask questions because they really wanted to understand how the system works. And for me specifically, because I basically was the connector across this massive corporate, so I would figure out what the different process is and how can I pitch people internally and how can I raise money for them. But they were equally super curious to understand how this organization works, which means when there's an opportunity, they want to learn as much as they can out of it. Anyway, these are like, I think, the top things that just really stood out for me for all of these individuals.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I think your first point on that links to Johnny's question. So I'm going to come to you before we go over to the quiz. So your first point, Mia, to recap for everyone else, was that absolute clarity of mind. So Johnny's question here is, he's clear on the problem, but what's the best way to build a solution and validate it? He has clarity on the problem, but I guess he's got less clarity on like the solution. Will people pay for it? What's your advice there, Mia?
Oh, look, let's not overthink it. Let's have a guess. It doesn't matter if your guess is wrong. Let's have a guess and then test it. So we want to do like really tiny guesses test. But if you want a shortcut, shortcut is find somebody who's built something very similar to this, somebody who has expertise in this. It will really give you a little shortcut. We don't need to learn everything from scratch. So you kind of want to get validation from the market, use experts. In your cases, guys, you're working with mentors. So this is, I guess, that shortcut for you guys. But one of the things I gave an advice to this other founders of mine who are not in Oneday that worked so brilliantly for them. I was surprised how well it worked. They're basically building this deep tech company in civil engineering. And I told them, hey, like, and they're in the UK. And I told them, hey, look in the US, look for founders who have just exited in like your area, civil engineering. Yeah. Go and get advice from them. And then they reached out to a bunch of them. One of those people ended up investing massively in them. You know, so
Amazing.
not only they got some advice, they also got some fundraising from a founder in the same space. And we're
Yeah.
all now collectively working together to grow in the US. So use the expert networks, but yes, don't overthink. Guess it, test it. You need to know what is this test we're going to build around it, and be comfortable that we might completely screw up. It doesn't matter. Like, it's a mistake, another guess, another assumption, test it, and we'll build on top of it. It's fine. It's absolutely
So
fine.
Mia, if I can push back on behalf of Johnny, I'm aware that Johnny's building something in the food space. Your expertise, your wide reaching experience is very tech focused. It's apps, it's deep tech, all these startups. So there's one thing that comes up for me at least, which is he's built physical products, slightly different to digital
Ah,
products. And then the other point here, which might open a whole other can of worms, which we'll need another hour for, which you don't have. But you saying about, guess, test, I think being really realistic about money more than anything, like the money, the funds that it takes to keep testing different things all the time. So that's my kind of brave devil's advocate back to you on
ooh,
that front.
okay. So take this with a grain of salt because food is not my space. But I would suspect we are looking for proxy product. Do you know good products that are similar enough where we can do little tests again without a lot of investment? So, for example, I don't know how good of an example this is, but I remember reading this thing about this particular founder who had an idea that basically they wanted to do some sort of a drink. They made a few batches of them. They sold it in some sort of local market. Now, that drink was not quite what they wanted to produce, but it gave them some sort of a reassurance. Guys, another thing that is really interesting for a lot of these type of products, because the problem around like food or anything consumer, a lot of times is emotional. It's not actually the drink itself. It's not really the top itself. It's not the new skirt. It's an emotional thing. If you think about the emotional angle, starting with a community is a really nice way. So you kind of want to tap into that lifestyle or emotion of that thing, the actual problem you're trying to solve. Yeah. And then as part of that journey, you can then think about, okay, what are the other brands that you can bring in? I've worked with a few founders that this way of thinking has really worked for them. One of them actually Oneday. Unfortunately, she left a while ago, but they started a jewelry brand where they really tapped into like kind of mental health. That was their angle. They ended up talking to tons and tons of founders, building a community around it. They didn't even launch. They literally sent a PDF to people that they had talked to say, hey, remember we had this conversation, we're now going to do this ring. That's it. And then I think within 2 days, they ended up selling about 2,000 euros when they literally had nothing. And they were like, hey, in 2 months' time, we will produce it and send it to you. And then that's kind of how they did it, but really by tapping into community and a very particular angle.
I love that advice. Thank you so much, Mia. Johnny, thanks for the great question. I've done my best to summarize the key points there from Mia's pearls of wisdom. Also, a message from Joseph. He really loved that point around the leap of faith. Mia, he had an injury that brought him to that realization. He's got to do something here with Oneday. So I love that. I'm
Okay.
aware that we're at time. So thank you so much to everyone for joining and listening in. If you can stay for a few more minutes, we would love for you to fill out the quiz. Mia, let's see if our audience get the questions right. So I'm going to head
Ooh.
over to our quiz. Okay, right. Mia, what's one thing you wish you knew before your first exit? Is it option A, that having an exit isn't a failure? B, that exit always results in regret? Or that C, I should have held on to the company forever?
Am I supposed to answer or are we asking people?
What's the correct answer from you, Mia?
Ooh, A.
Option A.
Uh, it's not really a failure. Do you know, like this is perceptions. The
Mm,
reality is basically what we perceive.
yeah, totally, totally. It's all perception, isn't it? And then the next quick quiz question is, with so much startup experience under your belt, Mia, what's the most common mistake that you see early stage entrepreneurs make? Is it option A, building before validating the customer market or demand? Is it B, focusing too much on market research and never launching? Or is it C, prioritizing customer feedback over product development?
Ooh, everybody can guess this one because we already talked about it a few times. Option A, building before actually having invalidation. Oh,
It is
yeah,
indeed option A. And then please rate the event. We really hope that you've enjoyed this session. Very grateful to Mia for your time this evening. I hope that this has been a welcome distraction from the reggaeton going outside your window. And for now, thank you all so much for joining. Mia, thank you for your time. It's been
not at
wonderful to hear
all.
just, I think, 2% of your incredible journey.
Thanks, everyone. Really great fun. And guys, you know that you can always find me on Slack if you want to drop me a line. And see you all soon. Thanks, Stephanie.